very much so.
Tell me something about that.
In my case, it was fear, and just because, I supposedly had something in my body that nobody else had, or very few people had, and I think it's because you're different.
Did you know one of the world's biggest pharmaceutical companies once sold heroin as a cough medicine? Bayer, now known for aspirin, marketed it as a remedy for common colds. This shocking chapter in medical history reveals just how different things were back then. It's hard to imagine, but in the late 1800s, Bayer, the same company that gave us aspirin, sold heroin as a miracle cure for common ailments like coughs and colds. How could this happen, and why did people think it was a good idea? To understand how a drug like heroin could go from pharmacy shelves to being one of the world's most harmful substances, we need to take a closer look at what was going on at the time and how companies like Bayer operated. In the late 19th century, medical knowledge was expanding rapidly, but there were many things doctors and scientists didn't fully understand yet, especially about addiction. Drug regulation as we know it today didn't exist. Back then, you could buy many medications over the counter without a prescription, including dangerous substances like morphine and cocaine. Bayer, which was already famous for developing aspirin in 1899, was looking for new products to market and sell. In 1898, they turned their attention to heroin. Heroin wasn't actually discovered by Bayer, but they were the first to commercialize it. The drug, also known as diacetylmorphine, was a modified version of morphine which doctors had been using for decades as a painkiller. Morphine was effective, but it was also highly addictive. At the time, many people, including doctors, were searching for an alternative to morphine that would provide pain relief without the risk of addiction. Bayer believed that heroin could be that alternative. Bayer's scientists, led by Heinrich Dresser, thought that heroin would be less addictive than morphine because it seemed to be processed differently by the body. They believed it would act more quickly and wear off faster, reducing the risk of dependence. So in 1898, Bayer started marketing heroin as a safe replacement for morphine, particularly for people who were already addicted to it. They also promoted it as a powerful remedy for coughs, colds, bronchitis, and even tuberculosis, a common and deadly disease at the time. You might be wondering, how did Bayer convince people that heroin was safe? In large part, it came down to marketing. Bayer advertised heroin as a wonder drug, and at first, many doctors and patients believed them. The company released pamphlets and advertisements that highlighted heroin's supposed benefits without much mention of any risks. It was sold as a cure for respiratory issues, which were incredibly common at the time, and as a painkiller. Ads suggested it was perfect for soothing stubborn coughs and helping people go through illnesses like pneumonia or tuberculosis, which were prevalent before antibiotics were available. Doctors were eager for solutions, and heroin was seen as a modern, scientific answer to many medical problems. It wasn't just the medical community that bought into the idea. Patients did too. Heroin was even marketed in forms like cough syrup, and many households kept it on hand, just as you might keep cough medicine in your bathroom cabinet today. It's strange to think about now, but there was a time when mothers were giving their children heroin to calm a bad cough. So why did Bayer believe heroin was safer than morphine? The truth is, they were relying on incomplete science and a lot of optimism. At the time, scientists didn't fully understand how addiction worked. They knew that morphine could be dangerously addictive, but because heroin had a slightly different chemical structure, Bayer assumed that it wouldn't carry the same risks. There wasn't much in the way of safety testing in those days. Drugs were often tested briefly, and if they worked to relieve symptoms, they were marketed to the public. One of the most shocking aspects of this story is that Bayer marketed heroin as a solution to opium and morphine addiction, even though it was just as addictive, if not more so. Patients who were trying to get off morphine were given heroin, only to find themselves hooked on an even stronger drug. It wasn't long before reports of heroin addiction started to surface, but Bayer and many doctors downplayed these concerns. After all, the drug seemed to be working for its intended purposes. People's coughs were going away, and it was providing relief from pain. The addiction problems were either ignored or seen as rare side effects. Another question that comes to mind is, how did Bayer advertise heroin to the public? Bayer's marketing of heroin was very different from the way drugs are advertised today. There were no strict laws about what companies could say about their products, and they didn't have to list side effects the way drug companies are required to do now.
Quandary, is the risk imposed by bleeding more than the risk imposed of the possibility of getting AIDS? And none of us know.
I really don't have an option. I have to continue using the plasma, or the concentrate as it's called. The thought of abandoning the kind of life that I have as a result of the concentrate is almost unthinkable.
Bayer advertised heroin as a powerful but safe treatment that could help with everything from minor coughs to severe illnesses. Doctors were one of the main targets of these marketing campaigns, with Bayer sending out literature that emphasized heroin's benefits without addressing the growing concerns about addiction. Heroin was sold in various forms, including syrups, tablets, and powders, and it was available over the counter in many places, meaning anyone could buy it without a prescription. There were no warnings on the labels about the potential for addiction. In fact, Bayer continued to promote the drug as non-addictive for several years after the first signs of problems emerged. It didn't take long for addiction issues to become too big to ignore. By the early 1900s, doctors were starting to see more and more patients who were addicted to heroin. At first, many in the medical community were reluctant to admit that the drug they had been prescribing was causing harm, but as the evidence mounted, it became clear that heroin was far from the safe remedy Bayer had promised. When did people realize heroin was dangerous? The truth started to come out around 1910 as reports of heroin addiction became more widespread. Medical professionals began to publish studies and articles showing that heroin was just as addictive, if not more so, than morphine. But by then, thousands of people were already struggling with addiction. In response to the growing crisis, governments started to take action. In the United States, the first major step came in 1914 with the Harrison Narcotics Tax Act. This law placed restrictions on the sale of heroin, morphine, and other narcotics, making it much harder to obtain them without a prescription. It didn't outright ban heroin, but it did limit its availability and began to recognize that narcotics needed to be more tightly controlled. By 1924, heroin was completely banned for medical use in the US, and other countries soon followed suit. Bayer's role in the heroin crisis didn't end overnight. The company officially stopped marketing heroin around 1913, but by then, the damage had been done.
A year ago in New York's gay community, then in the gay communities in San Francisco and Los Angeles. Now it's been detected in Haitian refugees. No one knows why. And in heavy drug users, especially in New York City. No one knows why. And in some people with hemophilia, a disease that prevents blood clotting so the patient needs frequent blood transfusions. Why?
The drug had become a significant public health issue, and its legacy as a cough suppressant would soon be overshadowed by its role in addiction and the illegal drug trade. Heroin, once sold in pharmacies, became a street drug that fueled addiction epidemics around the world. This chapter in pharmaceutical history raises important questions about the responsibility of drug companies and the importance of regulation. In the late 1800s and early 1900s, there were few rules governing the development, marketing, and sale of new medications. Companies like Bayer could promote their products with little oversight, and patients trusted them to be safe. The heroin saga helped to change that, leading to stricter laws about how drugs are tested and sold. Today, the pharmaceutical industry is much more regulated, but the story of heroin is a reminder of what can happen when profit and optimism overshadow caution. Bayer was a pioneer in the pharmaceutical world, but their promotion of heroin as a safe and effective medicine is a stark example of how even well-intentioned decisions can have disastrous consequences. It also highlights how much of our understanding of addiction has evolved. Back then, addiction was often seen as a moral failing or a weakness rather than a medical condition that required treatment. Today, we know that addiction is a complex disease, and we have symptoms in place to prevent drugs with high addiction potential from being widely available without strict controls. Bayer, for its part, continues to be one of the largest pharmaceutical companies in the world. The company is best known now for its over-the-counter products like aspirin and Alka-Seltzer, but the heroin chapter remains a controversial part of its history. The story of how heroin went from being seen as a miracle drug to a banned substance is one of the most fascinating and cautionary tales in medical history. So what can we learn from Bayer's heroin experiment? It teaches us the importance of rigorous drug testing and regulation. It shows how even the best intentions can lead to harmful outcomes if not guided by solid science. And it serves as a reminder that we must always approach new medical treatments with caution, especially when they seem too good to be true. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss any of our latest updates. Do let us know your thoughts in the comments section. We will see you guys next time.